Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Uh, Welcome back, students. This is Dr. Nuruniza Muhammad Rashid, and I'm actually continuing our process of understanding research methodology for Site 1321 Research Methodology 1. Now, you are well within the process of designing your research for your research proposal. Now, among the steps that we've taken is actually basically like, get exploring our topic. All right, exploring our topic. I've talked to you about the process of conducting a research, like, coming up with a question, searching for the factors, and then narrowing it down further and further. Now, let's talk about this current topic here, is that which is part of the narrowing down the research topic, that is actually selecting a problem and reviewing the research. Right. So selecting a problem and reviewing the research is actually about you finding a topic of interest, an area of interest, and then developing questions about that area of interest, and then search for literature that has communicated about these topics. Okay. So let's say that you are interested about understanding mental health. Right. That is actually a very, very broad area. So you should question further, like, what is mental health? And then among the key steps of a scientific research is that what is known about mental health and what is not known about mental health yet within the area that requires you to do a review of literature, or an alternative term for it is literature review. Okay, so you begin with an idea. Idea is basically, what do you want to know? All right, okay, what is it that you are curious of? You might think about, okay, I want to know about mental health. But from my awareness, and I believe from your side as well, you all are very familiar with mental health area, because mental health is not just that. There's actually like different variation of psychological disorders, and also when it comes to mental health, you at least have somehow an idea about what influences mental health, what causes mental health either to be well, or you can say unwell, or the effects of good mental health and the effects of poor mental health. All right, so that's the generation of an idea. Now, once you begin with that, of course, idea would be like, what am I interested in? You can proceed with asking the question, all right? Okay, what exactly are you curious about? Okay, and then you can develop a tentative hypothesis, which you've also done. So you're curious about perhaps like, okay, what happens if someone has a poor mental health? Okay, and then you can develop a hypothesis. A person with a poor mental health might have some sort of like difficulties in managing their life or day-to-day activities. The way I said it still seems general, and that's okay. Okay, because along the way you will improvise it, and that process requires you to do literature review. All right, okay. So it's important that you conduct a literature review, all right, and it's so that you can continuously refine your area, refine your research question, and refine your research hypothesis. When we are trying to do a research, it is very important that we have questions that can be answered. Okay, if we have a question that cannot be answered, it would lead to an impossible research design and research proposal. Okay, so begin with selecting area in which to work. All right, okay. This is to avoid us making fatal errors, like fatal errors, referring to errors that could basically be causing jeopardies towards your research. What would that be? If you have a textbook already, among the errors that students make is that they choose either too broad or too narrow. All right, too broad or too narrow. Like, what happens if your research is too broad, right? One of the things that could happen is that you don't know, like, exactly what type of hypothesis you're testing. You might be have difficulties in measuring your variables. All right, okay, measuring your variables. For example, you're like, okay, I just want to measure mental health. Now, you would come to the realization of the fact that mental health, there are actually many ways to measure it. There might be a lot of mental health skills that are available out there. Okay, that might be one thing. All right. Okay, another thing is that if you have selecting an area that might be too broad again, it might lead you to difficulties in coming up with a proper hypothesis. Okay, a proper hypothesis is something that you can test. Usually, if you can test it, now first of all, your independent variable and your dependent variable, they both have a proper score that you can determine what if it's high, what if it's low. All right, okay. Now, sometimes another fatal error is too narrow of a area. If it's too narrow again, you might actually limit yourself to topics that maybe does not exist or topics that already have received an answer to it. Right. It is key that when we're conducting research, of course, there has to be an aspect of uniqueness and novelty. Right. Okay. Another last error is that students are inflexible. Inflexible. So, when I say inflexible, I do not mean that you should change your topic area entirely. If you recall, when we first started class, I've already told you do not change your big topic. You can change the content of it. Of course, I'm more than happy to guide you throughout, but you should not ever change your topic because this is actually going to encourage you to conduct a proper literature review and have a more creative way of understanding. Hey, from which angle should I look at this? From which angle should I be looking at this? Okay, I think I will try to describe this more during class session because I will tell you about how, hey, if we continuously change our topic, right, we cannot be creative and innovative in understanding a problem. Okay. So, why do we need to get different sources? All right, okay. It is important that you actually get different sources. That means in terms of literature. All right, okay, literature. So when you're trying to define your interests, right, it's good that you try to discover as many different literature input. Okay, from textbooks, from the newspapers is fine as well. But of course, the most important one would be an actual article, journal article. It will help you to gain an idea, which is most important about how the current scientific field understands it. This includes what kind of terminologies do they use? Another thing is that who are talking about this? Are they the clinical psychologists? Are they the counseling psychologists? Are they the sociologists, anthropologists even? Okay. And then knowing who communicates about this, it allows us to know, right, how important the topic is, to whom the topic is important to. And then on top of that, of course, what is yet to be discovered, right? Okay, what is yet to be discovered? It allows you to actually gain a deep understanding, and also of the area itself, and also you can actually gain a deep understanding about how to conduct research about the topic itself. Okay, so of course, part of the process is that when you are discovering, of course, like I said, beginning with mental health, right? Mental health is a huge, huge area itself. So you can try to discover what we call in Malay term cabang or branches. Okay, so try to basically bracket it out. Okay, bracket it out. But I believe that you have done so. I hope you're not in this stage anymore. But if you are in this stage still, what you can do is that when you are searching for your literature, branch it out in terms of, hey, in this paper, how they communicate about the topic? In another paper, how do they communicate about this topic? And this is rather important, and it can be quite, I would say, tedious and difficult to do because it might be a moment for you to realize that the topic is communicated about differently compared to how you've known about it before. Right. Okay. In my own personal experience, that actually happened to me when I was doing my PhD research. Okay. I had a preconceived initial idea about what the topic was like, but when I start to read about hundreds and hundreds of literature, I realized that there are many ways of looking at it. And this is the creative part. Okay, the creative part. Then, of course, from that, you can see how different people communicate about it and then perhaps try to narrow it down bit by bit if possible. Okay, so Now, the process of, again, from the idea, to the question, and finally to the hypothesis, of course. All right, okay. It is believed that at this point, right, you can go back. You can go back. Okay, initially I wanted to look at mental health, and then I discovered this research question, and I tried to write the hypothesis. You can try to write it back. You can try to revise it based on how you have discovered new information regarding it. Okay, so this is basically an example about how you can align your research problem, your research question, and finally your research hypothesis. Okay, all right, so in this regard, right, usually the problem is about a question that is unanswered. Okay, the problem is the question that is unanswered. So you begin with a brief topic. Again, like I said, mental health. The given examples here. Let's say you are interested about open classroom and academic success. Then you come up with a question. What is the effect of open versus traditional classrooms on reading level? The hypothesis. Children who are taught reading in open classroom settings will read at a higher grade level than children who are taught reading in a traditional setting. If you look at here, right, the research interest of ideas, it sort of began with a rather general idea, but yet for this one, it is a general yet almost specific because it has provided a clear, defined IV and DV already. Okay, so in that regard, um, it allows them to come up with a refined research question and a refined research hypothesis. If you did not start with this, that's fine. That's why the literature reading is important. You go slowly, 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 and eventually come to a refined position, which is here. Okay, so this is eventually the expected output at this particular stage for your work, right? Right. So, what are the three sources, main types of sources that you should consult when you are conducting your literature review? Right. Okay. So we have general sources, okay, and then we also have basically secondary sources. All right. Okay. Now we also have primary sources. Okay. Let's go back one by one. General sources. Okay. General sources usually is basically the initial confrontation or meet up that you have with the topic. This could be as simple as discussion during classroom session, discussion with friends, and on top of that, of course, any other exposure that you have, such as the textbooks that you have, and then on top of that, of course, perhaps the newspapers that you read, the radio that you listen to. So this is basically the basic general sources. Now, before I communicate about secondary sources, let's talk about primary sources. If you recall from your academic skills class, if you have attended it, primary sources refers to original. All right, original mean that they have conducted their own research. They have the original evidence and they use that to analyze and come up with their conclusion. So remember this, primary sources will be the one that has conducted original research, has their own original evidence and analyze it to provide their own conclusion. The attribute of a primary source is that the data is not basically acquired from someone else likely. They actually identify that data themselves. So originality is there. On top of that, the data is not a further interpretation. Okay, the data is not a further interpretation. It's just that one person interpretation. Okay, 1%. So the author themselves, they use the data to provide their own interpretation. Unlike secondary sources. For secondary sources, now the person, the person who has written the journal provide their own interpretation and secondary sources uses the interpretation instead of the original data itself. So therefore, secondary sources will be reviews and synthesis of literature. Okay, so meaning that they take other people's papers, they read it, and they use whatever definition and whatever conclusion that has been provided by the original author and come up with their own conclusion. Right? Okay. So What are the steps that are required in you conducting your literature review? Okay, so first of all, define your idea in as general terms as possible by using general sources. Then search through the secondary sources, then search through the primary sources, and you can begin organizing your notes and start to develop your proposal. Okay, so this is actually a suggested step. How does this help? So general sources just allows you to know how people communicate about it in general. Okay, how do people communicate? Like how do people talk about mental health and how does it pique your interest? Usually using the general sources allows you to feel like, hey, I can relate to this topic. I can understand this topic. Okay, then next, when you go through the secondary sources, it's another step of getting to the scientific communication process. Okay, so how does prominent academics talk about this topic and what have they gathered from multiple different papers talking about this topic itself? Okay, again, it gives you a general understanding, yet it's communicated using scientific communication process. Next, you have the primary sources. Now, primary sources is incredibly important because why? Well, we're trying to conduct our own research, right? Okay, we need to understand how people have studied the exact same research topic. And we need to also understand basically like, what has been known about the topic and what is yet to be known about the topic itself. So primary sources are very, very important. Then next, what you can do is that start beginning to organize your notes and write your proposal. Okay, so again here, general sources provide an overview of topic and provide leads to where more information can be found. Secondary sources provides a level of information once removed from the original work. And then we have the primary sources, which is the original work. Each is actually important. However, the most important one that you should cite more. So within your research proposal, there should be more and more content of this is your primary sources. Okay. All right. So analyze the importance of a research article in helping being familiar with existing research on the same topic. Okay. So you need to know what a research article look like. Okay. Usually a research article, they actually have at least methodology section, result section, and discussion section. Okay, they should have a methodology, results and discussion, and the methodology is actually about acquiring data or collecting data. Okay, you should try to judge the research study. Okay, one of the ways to judge a research study is that you look at the purpose of the research, the objective of the research, and do they try to attempt to actually answer the question of the research using appropriate methods. Okay, and also in terms of research area. All right, okay. Is the research area relevant to your own criteria for the research itself? Right. There are many electronic tools that can assist. So basically, you have a lot of online databases, or basically just your simple search engine. All right. So search engine is a good method to search for your sources. There are many, many different search engines that are available. Okay. So we have basically Google, of course, when we're trying to get an idea about, let's say, communicating about homelessness. All right. Now, sometimes you need to use what we call as Boolean operators. So Boolean operators either narrow or expand your search. Okay, for example, and so the Boolean operator A and D and allows you to basically search for more than one terminology for your search result. Not, on the other hand, reduces it. Okay, reduces it, basically removing perhaps any one terminology that you feel irrelevant. Or on the other hand, is basically again expanding it. So allowing the paper or the result to actually include any one of the terminology. Using of the asterisk is about variation in spelling. Okay, so basically you have the Google that which you can use. All right, okay. Google itself has actually an extremely extensive way of searching for article. However, I do highly recommend utilizing Google Scholar instead to search for your journals, which is actually containing the original research. All right, okay. There's also a number of databases. Databases basically is a systematic tool that actually gathers billions, I would say, of research articles all over. Okay, it's a common tool used by academics in order to search for their research articles. Right? Okay, I think that's about it. Thank you very much.